Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joe Lombardo, and I am the coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC. UNAC is a co-sponsor, along with the U.S. Peace Council, of today's webinar. And we're fortunate to have five people who were actually visiting and observing the elections in Venezuela that took place recently. The people of Venezuela voted to re-elect their president, Nicolas Maduro, on July 28th. This, despite the interference and harsh sanctions imposed by the U.S. to try and defeat President Maduro and put an end to the Bolivarian Revolution. With no proof whatsoever, the U.S. claims that the elections were not fair, but the electoral process in the U.S. pales in comparison to that in Venezuela. In Venezuela, the National Electoral Council is actually elected and ensures that people, even in the poorest sections of society, have the opportunity to register and vote. Ballots are cast electronically, and a backup paper ballot is also cast. All parties can observe the counting of the ballots. The U.S. speaks of demonstrations against the elections in Venezuela, but hardly a mention in the national news of the 20,000 of us who marched to protest at the Democratic National Convention last week in Chicago. It was covered on the local news there because you can't hide things like that when they're happening in the streets of your city, but barely covered on the national news. The U.S. imposed economic sanctions on Venezuela were constructed in order to cause hardship on the people in the hope that they would turn against their government and a U.S.-supported candidate could be installed instead. This would allow the Venezuelan oil and other resources to again be used to make profit for the U.S. banks and corporations instead of the Venezuelan people. With more than 900 election observers present, the Venezuelan people said no. So today we have five of the people who observed the elections to speak to us on what they saw and answer our questions. I hope you find the webinar enlightening. And our first speaker is going to be Jamu Baraka, who is a geopolitical analyst, an organizer, writer, human rights defender, and a veteran of the U.S. Black Liberation Movement for over 53 years of work in the U.S. and internationally. Baraka is a founder of the Black Alliance for Peace and is today the chair of its coordinating committee. Recently, he co-founded the International Coalition to Stop Genocide in Gaza in support of the South African case filed with the International Court of Justice against Israel for the genocide. In 2016, Baraka was a candidate for Vice President of the United States on the Green Party ticket. He is a member of the Secretariat of the U.S. Peace Council and the leadership body, the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. He is an editor and contributing columnist to Black Agenda Report and a recipient of the Serena Schirm Award for Uncompromising Integrity in Journalism. In 2019, he was awarded the U.S. Peace Memorial Peace Prize. So I will turn it over to Jamal Baraka.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that long introduction. I sent that to you and suggested you just pull something from that.
Sorry.
But, no problem. That's fine.
Was all good.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Really appreciate the leadership that you continue to provide, along with Comrade Bauman from the U.S. Peace Council, that I'm a member of both of those stellar formations. it was also an honor to be part of the process of observing the elections in Venezuela. This happened to be my third opportunity to, in fact, to do that in Venezuela. And the report back is fairly simple in terms of what we saw. But what's complicated, what is the political challenge, is the meaning of what is unfolding in Venezuela, in our region, and globally. Now, I'm sure that our speakers are going to talk in detail about the process. You touched on that already, Joe. Some aspects of that process, a process that many around the world who are honest will conclude and have concluded that is one of the best in the world. That the possibility of fraud is almost non-existent, and that's what makes the attempt on the part of the U.S. working with its comprador elements on the ground in Venezuela to delegitimize the process by using what appears to be fraudulent data um, and a cyber attack to undermine the integrity of the reporting process. It makes it so egregious that here we have these kinds of efforts being made, supported by the U.S., a nation in which its own limited and phony democracy is under severe duress, and that's to be mild with that critique. The process is a process in which, between the biometric identification, the paper ballot backup using to support or the backup the electronic ballots, the audits before, during, and after the election, the process of allowing people to observe from the various parties the process of the actual vote itself and the counting of the vote. Again, it makes it very difficult. When we moved around on the day of the vote on the 28th, what we saw is what we have seen before in the past. Numerous voting stations, much more than what we see, for example, in the US. For example, in one community, I counted 8 polling stations in a radius of about 4.5, 5 blocks. Okay, so people had an opportunity to participate, and the people of Venezuela were taking that opportunity. The lines were long. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of positive energy there on that date and in the day leading up to the vote itself. Something that we don't normally see too much in the U.S. If you participate in the electoral process in the U.S. and in some places you have these long ass lines because there's not enough polling stations, and it's nothing like what we see in Venezuela and other parts of the global South. And we have this difference in the energy because I think people in the global South understand that they are on the cutting edge of history. That history, in fact, is with the people outside of the US and Western European domains. And there is a belief that they represent a new possibility, the possibility of building new societies. And so they are very adamant in supporting their processes, including what we see and what's been unfolding in Venezuela for the last 25 years or so. That the people understand the terms of the struggle, that the vote isn't just a vote for a president, but a vote for the Bolivarian process, for the continuation of their unique experience. And so as we look at and talk about what happened on the 28th, and we talk about the attempts on the part of the fascists in the US to undermine the process, we want to keep in mind just what this means for our region and for the world. If there is a shift in power in Venezuela to the radical right, the fascists in Venezuela, it will have a severe impact, negative impact on the correlation and balance of forces in our region to the benefit of imperialism, to the benefit of those forces that are trying to undermine historical progress. So, and that's why it's important for people to keep this in context, especially for some heads of state that seem not to understand the importance of being consistent with the principle of non-intervention and commenting on what should be done in the nation of Venezuela. I think those heads of state should probably, in particular the ones here in the region, should probably just take the model of AMLO in Mexico and close their mouths. So what we have to do is understand what this means, and that basically the defense of this process is fundamentally important. That the tendency on the part of some in the West, particularly in the U.S., to lay back and pontificate and talk about processes that they don't really understand, to give left coverage to a regime change playbook, once again, is really not only unacceptable, it is something that has to be completely rejected and severely criticized for its arrogance. We have to recognize that what we have in our region is an unfinished revolution. It's a continuation of the process of authentic national liberation and national self-determination. And that these experiments are just that. They're experiments in that process of liberating the peoples of our region. And that's why it's very important for us to understand the terms of the struggle and be in support of these efforts to advance the peoples of our region. So we need to talk about what is to be done. Hopefully we can talk about that this evening. We need to put in context what's been built in Venezuela, the ideal that with the social base that the Bolivarian process has, with more than 5 million people a part of its militia, with the thousands that are part of the PSUV, the political party, the 100,000 or more that are part of various movements and organizations that are part of the social bloc, the progressive or revolutionary, if you will, social bloc in Venezuela. The notion that these reactionaries representing a divided opposition could garner 70% of the vote in Venezuela. For anybody to believe that, you have to be living on another planet, or never have visited Venezuela and don't know anything about a revolutionary process. So finally, folks, we have to talk about what needs to be done. We have to talk about what we need to do in terms of helping to preempt these kinds of interventions from the hegemon of the North. We need to talk about how we strengthen our regional cooperation. We need to discuss how we move from anti-war positions, pro-peace positions, to anti-imperialist positions, because that is the only way that those of us in particular who are at the center of empire can support the processes of change in our region and in the United States of America. So we have many things that this situation in Venezuela raises, many questions in terms of theory and practice, and I'm hoping that we can touch on some of those this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Let me just tell people a few things. First of all, if you have questions, on the bottom of your screen, there are some controls. One is a Q&A icon. If you press that, you can put in questions that we can answer at the end of the presentations by the people tonight. So I urge you to do that if you have questions. Additionally, if you like what you hear tonight and would like a copy of this webinar, for anybody that has registered, we will send it. It will come from Zoom directly 24 hours afterwards there will be a link, and we'll have the a video of the webinar there. So please look for that. If you see something coming from Zoom 24 hours from now, don't discard it, because it will have a link at the bottom of that email to the webinar. Our next speaker was supposed to be Vijay Prashad, but Vijay is in Santiago, Chile, right now, where there are some interesting things going on. And he doesn't have electricity. He's going to try to figure out a way to get on. So hopefully we will be able to hear from him before the speakers end tonight. So next, we are going to go to Zoe Alexander, who is a journalist and the editor of the international left media outlet People's Dispatch. So I'm going to turn it over now to Zoe.
Well, thank you so much, Joe and Bauman, for the invitation to speak. And I'm really honored to be joined by such, worthy and important voices such as Ajamu, Roger, and the other comrades. So thank you so much for having me. And I think many of us we were all on the ground in different capacities. I was there mainly as a journalist, so I thought it would maybe make sense to focus on some of the aspects regarding the mainstream media coverage of what happened in Venezuela. I think that Ajamu went over some of the, these technical details, what was seen on the day of, extremely well. So I wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit with regards to what a lot of us have been seeing over the past several months and weeks, which is this kind of crazy, dystopic mainstream media coverage. So people probably would have seen that leading up to July 28th, which is again the day that the elections were held in Venezuela, a date that was agreed upon by the Venezuelan authorities as well as the opposition through a dialogue process in Barbados. Leading up to July 28th, in the weeks ahead of these elections, we started to see a lot of articles on Venezuela. So in the New York Times, in BBC, in Latin American media outlets such as Infobae, Univision, El Espectador in Colombia, and they were a lot of different articles, but really focusing on three main themes. One was to say that Edmundo Gonzalez was polling way ahead of Nicolas Maduro, that all leading pollsters had predicted a landslide for Edmundo Gonzalez. Of course, this analysis and these sort of polls leave out the fact that a lot of these pollsters are in fact from corporate and right-wing media outlets and really not an accurate judge of really the sentiment on the ground. So that was one sort of main narrative that we saw ahead of the elections, Gonzalez landslide. The second, which seems to be in contradiction to the first, but was still, put forward by all of these outlets, is that the Venezuelan electoral system is flawed, and that is 100% likely that fraud will take place. So at the same time that they're saying that Edmundo Gonzalez is going to win in a landslide, they're also saying that if Nicolas Maduro wins the elections, it is because fraud took place. And then the third element, which was being reported on a lot, is sort of this one-sided discussion of the socioeconomic problems facing Venezuela. So talking about Venezuela has one of the largest migrant crises in the region. Millions of Venezuelans were forced to flee. The economic situation in Venezuela is very poor. And, constantly hitting on the fact that the government of Nicolas Maduro has been unable to respond to this economic crisis, and that millions of people have been forced to flee. And so we just see these lines repeated again and again and again. And then, election day comes, and, I'm sure many of my fellow panelists had the same sort of experience where you're going out to the polling places, you're visiting the different sites, seeing how the polling is taking place, and there appears a New York Times news article saying that mass irregularities and fraud taking place in the Venezuelan elections. People are unable to go to the polling stations. There's just generalized chaos. And this is at the same time that, seeing utter calm in the city. Of course, I was only in Caracas, but from hearing from people who went to other states, noting a similar sort of level of calm and ease with the process. And New York Times, before the polls are closed, before anything has happened, they're already reporting that widespread irregularities, widespread issues, not people aren't able to get to the polling station. So already we start to see these usual suspects lining up sort of with their prepared interventions. And then 6 p.m. comes, the polls close. In many places, they remain open for a limited period of time because in Venezuela, the electoral law says that if anyone is in line at the polling station, they have the right to vote. So some polling stations stay open, and thus begins the count at each precinct with the competent authorities present, as well as the representatives of different parties. And at this point, the opposition, as many of us know, just begins to say that they won, but there was also fraud. And then we see this echoed again in mainstream media. Seems, reinforcing this idea that there's fraud, building off of what they've already been saying. Fast forward to just past midnight when Venezuela's Electoral Council announces that they've counted 80% of the votes, and there's an irreversible trend indicating that Nicolas Maduro has won the elections. And, some of these same media outlets report, government declares Maduro victory, many suspicious that this is the case. The next day, there's, of course, opposition press conference. They say, mass fraud took place. They actually won with 70%. And then, that whole week, we just see report after report of Washington Post. I reviewed all of the electoral tallies of the opposition, and I can affirm that fraud took place. And you just see this narrative repeated in different sort of iterations, but essentially saying the same thing. And it's almost as if what they thought and what they wanted to happen months ago, and what they, the way they believed they were going to construct their narrative is exactly what did happen. They knew that Nicolas Maduro would likely win. Chavismo has about 50% of base of support, as kind of just that has been the historic numbers of the base of support of Chavismo as a project amongst the population. Likely Maduro is going to win. And how can media play a role in delegitimizing this victory? And so it's very clear that leading up to the elections, they had their strategy very clear. They were very clear about the messaging they needed to put forth. They were very clear about what they would cover, what they wouldn't. Even leading up to the elections, the CNE did an open audit of the voting machines to debunk some of the claims from right-wing media that fraud would take place. They chose not to cover that. They chose not to cover the violent protests, the fascist, racist protests against symbols of Chavismo, against offices of PSUV. They decided better focus on the fact that several hundred people have been arrested. I mean, Adamu already referred to how hypocritical this is coming from US media outlets. And Joe also mentioned it, that these same outlets are not even covering the people's protests that are going on day after day in this country. So I think that when all of these sort of mainstream media narratives are presented to people, there's sort of a difficulty to be able to decipher what's real, what really happened. It's very easy because they've worked very hard at actually making these narratives and trying to push a certain reality. And so I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of those points about this mainstream media attack, because I think that, especially as Adamu said, our role in the imperialist core is to unmask these sort of media charades. We've seen it, of course, over the past 10 months with how these same media outlets are still able to justify the genocide of over 40,000 Palestinian people. Why would these media outlets actually be telling us the truth about a democratic process in Venezuela? So, I think these are some of the key things to keep in mind. And it really is and was a surreal experience to be on the ground, seeing what was happening with my own eyes, and then read a completely different sort of narrative from these outlets that really, they could have been on the ground. They didn't really need to be on the ground because they already had in mind what they wanted to say. And so I think there has been a really strong pushback from left and anti-imperialist media outlets to debunk these. I know Orinoco Tribune has been at the forefront of this. Many other media outlets, Venezuelan Analysis in English, really trying to unmask what's been these narratives. And it's important also as the organizations that are part of the Peace Council, that are part of UNAC, to continue to share these materials so people can be aware and have the tools to really understand this extremely, extremely biased mainstream media coverage of what's happening in Venezuela. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Zoe, for bringing some reality into what we've been hearing on the news media. Zoe's talk reminds me of the last time I was in Venezuela with a couple of other people on this panel. What had happened then was the lights went out. And you should know about the Venezuelan electric system. It was built by the United States and Germany. And because of sanctions, they cannot get replacement parts. But it was clearly sabotage. I mean, they even found some of the people that did the sabotage. It was clearly sabotage to that system. But what we saw in the American media, in the US media, when we were down there was that they were rioting in the streets. That might happen in the United States, but it didn't happen in Venezuela. We didn't see that at all. In fact, we saw something very, very different, which was cooperation among the people in the streets. There's a lot of buildings that they created to get people who are underhoused or not housed, give them a place to live, with wonderful names like Che Guevara and Malcolm X. They name some of these buildings, but they have elevators and they're high rise. And so they were concerned because of the electricity. Well, what about so-and-so on the seventh floor? Can she get water? Has someone checked on her? So they organized together to check on everybody, and they organized together in a cooperative way, which is the difference between a revolutionary country and a country like our own. But what we did when we were down there was, because we were hearing this fake news from the United States, is we videoed ourselves telling what we were seeing in the streets, what the real situation was. Of course, we were, shouting in the dark. We don't have the ability to get out the truth as they have the ability to get out the lies. But we did the best we could, and we had to do that at that time. And now we're starting to see in the media, in the Western media, and the colonialist countries and the capitalist countries, we're starting to see them shutting down the social media too. They do not want the truth to come out in any means at all. And that's the reality that we see. So our next speaker is Roger Harris, I believe. And let me find it. Okay, Roger is next. And he is a member of the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council. He is active with the anti-imperialist human rights group called Task Force on the Americas that was founded in 1985. He's active with the Sanctions Kill campaign that fights against the unilateral coercive measures called sanctions. And he's a founding member of the Venezuelan Solidarity Network. He regularly publishes on Venezuela and Latin American affairs in general in Arauco Tribune, Counterpunch, and other progressive media. I'll turn it over to Roger.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for the other panelists, my distinguished panelists, and thank you especially for the people participating. There's over 100 of us, and I think we're all concerned about U.S. imperialism and its interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela. I wanted to do a deep dive into one of the themes that Zoe began, and that is the media obsession claiming that Maduro lost. But I want to flip that narrative and reverse the question. Did the opposition win? And it came, when we were down there in Venezuela, and as Zoe explained, shortly after midnight, the night of the election, they announced that Maduro won. And it came as absolutely no surprise, though, that the opposition called fraud. Because they've called fraud, first of all, they announced that they would call fraud if they lost, but also they've called fraud in nearly every single one of the 31 national elections that the Chavistas have had since Hugo Chavez first became president in 1999. The only two elections I actually recognized were the two elections that they won. This is because the far-right opposition, which is, by the way, funded and directed by Washington, it pursues not a democratic strategy, but an insurrectionary strategy. They do not recognize the Constitution or the institutions of democracy in Venezuela. A good example would be their so-called primary. If you've read the mainstream media, you've heard about the unified primary. Well, this was not a primary that was conducted like most of the other primaries by the CNE, the Venezuelan Electoral Authority. No, this was a primary that was a private affair. It was administered by an NGO called SUMATE. SUMATE is a recipient of NED, National Endowment for Democracy funds, a CIA cutout. The primary candidate that won, there was 13 candidates in there. The one that won that primary was the one that Washington had pre-chosen. She had actually auditioned before the Congressional Foreign Relations Committee. And her name is Maria Corina Machado. Perhaps you've heard that name. And she won in a crowded field of 13 candidates with an incredulous 92% win. Now, the other candidates in this phony primary, they claimed that, well, fraud. And so how did she respond to the fraud? She destroyed the ballots. And that's because SUMATE, the private group that ran the primary, was her private NGO. Now, she is a false populist, despised by much of the opposition. She's a member of one of the richest families in Venezuela. She went to Yale and has lived in California, in Florida. And then most egregious was when the populace in Venezuela was suffering and continue to suffer under the U.S. unilateral coercive measures, euphemistically called sanctions. She not only supported the sanctions, but she called for their intensification and even for U.S. military intervention in Venezuela to overthrow the government. Now, She's also aligned with the international right wing and an ardent Zionist. So it is obviously why Washington backed her. And Washington backed her knowing full well that in 2015, she had been barred from running for office. She was barred from running for office because while she was a member of the National Assembly, she accepted a diplomatic post with a foreign country in order to testify against her own country. And such treasonous behavior is not only prohibited by the Venezuelan constitution, but by many other countries. But for the United States, the fact that Machado was disbarred was actually seen as a bonus because it allowed the State Department to claim that its candidate was unfairly disqualified when they knew that to be the fact to begin with. And this is why we have to really understand that Washington's intent in Venezuela, as in elsewhere, is not to encourage a free and fair democratic process. And on the contrary, is to delegitimize the one that is already in place. Now, because Machado was disbarred from running, she chose a surrogate, Edmundo Gonzalez, personally chose it, not democratically, but personally chose Gonzalez. Now, this guy is a former diplomat way back from the 1980s. He was completely unknown, had no electoral experience. And contrary to the nonsense that we hear in the corporate press of a unified opposition, the non-Chavista elements are anything but unified. I mean, just look at the ballot. There were 10 people running. There was Maduro, the U.S. chosen candidate, but there were 8 other opposition candidates on the ballot. The opposition was nowhere nearly unified. And as Jabu said, it's ridiculous to believe that the Machado Gonzalez ticket won by 70%. That lacks credibility. That would mean that 7 out of 10 Venezuelans supported them. And it's not proven in the street. Machado actually had called for a number of demonstrations after the so-called fraudulent election was over, but her demonstrations were quite small. They were even smaller than her pre-election rallies. And that's an indication of the really high level of popular support and high level of organization that the Maduro government and the Bolivarian Revolution has. Also, we should look at what the Machado's platform was, because it wasn't a popular platform. It wasn't a winning platform to begin with. She was calling for extreme neoliberal privatization just across the board of education, healthcare, housing, food assistance, the National Oil Agency. These were not sort of positions that people, after 25 years of enjoying the benefits of Chavismo, were going to vote for. So in backing somebody so unattractive, so unknown, and so unpopular as Gonzalez, the United States really showed its disinterest in a good faith engagement in the democratic electoral process. But what we really have to remember and focus on is not so much the weeds of where the act is released and all those type of little questions of electoral law, but really look at the larger picture, which was that free and fair elections in Venezuela were impossible. They were impossible not because of the machinations of the Chavistas, but because Washington was holding a gun to the head of the Venezuelans in the form of the hybrid war against Venezuela. And it's this paramount issue that we should be focusing on. And in conclusion, I'm speaking here for the U.S. Peace Council, we should defend the right of Venezuela to defend its national sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. BJ hasn't been able to join us yet. Please remind you to put questions in the question and answer area. Hopefully he will be able to join us. And in the meantime, we'll turn to our next speaker, who is Bamin Azad. who is the president of the U.S. Peace Council, and he's also a member of the Administrative Committee of UNAC, the United National Anti-War Coalition. He is also a member of the Secretariat of the World Peace Council and serves as the representative of the World Peace Council at the United Nations. So at this point, I'm going to give the mic to Aminazad.
Thank you very much, Joe. It was an honor to be in Venezuela during the electoral process. I'm also proud that I am among the prominent speakers that are on the panel to speak about what we saw and what we witnessed in Venezuela. I was one of the 3 people, I think. I should explain this. The international observers were actually 2 groups. One was general observers, which I was a member of. And then there were the official observers that were ambassadors from different countries, members of parliament from different countries, from international institutions and everything else. So I was among the 3 people who were chosen from among the general observers to participate in the workshop that the CNE had organized for the official observers of the electoral process. It was a half-a-day workshop. We went there from early morning and it lasted until the afternoon. And all directors of the CNE were there, present, and each made the presentation. And this involved a kind of an audio-visual presentation with PowerPoint and all kinds of graphics and charts that described and explained how this electoral process is working and what the procedures are and what the measures are in the process. It was fascinating to witness how many layers of physical and electronic security measures were implemented for the system, how many layers of audit and check were established, and how the whole system was so integrated that there was really no way to tamper with the results of the election. This was unbelievable, of course, in addition to the fact that unlike many other countries, almost all countries, Venezuela does not have 3 powers like judiciary and executive and parliament. It has 5. And the 4th one is electoral power, which is a separate power in the state, which is independent of the rest of the powers of the state. It is elected power, and it overlooks and oversees all of the electoral processes at any level in Venezuela. It is its only task. So to talk about fraudulent elections under these circumstances is really lying to your teeth. There's no way such a thing could have happened. Now, the question is, if that is the case, why is it that this US-backed opposition and the external forces, foreign forces, are making so much noise about the electoral process? And I think we should understand that this whole hoopla and noise is not limited to Venezuela. We cannot look at the causes of this noise and sabotage just by looking at the case in Venezuela. We know our world is going through a major transformation from a unilateral domination of imperialist powers to a multipolar world consisting of various poles and also based on the international law and respect for the sovereignty of all nations. It is clear that in this process, US and the other imperialist forces, powers, are losing their grip over the world affairs, and they are afraid that it may get to a point that this whole process may become irreversible. And we are getting to that point almost. So it is for this very reason that they are frantically trying to disrupt this process by any means they can. And this Venezuelan case is not alone. Look at what is happening in other countries. The same way, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Palestine, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, one by one. All of them are under the same kind of attack as Venezuela is. So in that sense, we have to understand that we're dealing with a much broader problem, and the issues are much more global than just nitpicking on the procedures or processes or even shortcomings of any state at any time that is resisting the imperialist powers, when we can clearly see that these shortcomings, if any, are a result, are the doing of the United States imperialism itself. That the sanctions, unilateral coercive measures, the sabotages that they're doing in political process, that the monies that are being flown into these countries are coming from one point, one center, and one center alone. And this is aimed at sabotaging the global process that is underway. So if we want to look at the situation, we have to understand that the unity in this process, maintaining support, cooperation, and solidarity with the countries that are resisting this imperialist domination is key to the success of everybody. And that is the important point. As Comrade Ajamu mentioned, just imagine what happens if Venezuela is turned into the control of the lackeys of the United States. Just think about what will happen in the Middle East and West Asia if the Iranian resistance is crushed. What will happen if the Yemenis and Palestinians are crushed? What kind of world will emerge out of that? And can we just be so picky and fall prey to this imperialist propaganda that first tries to destroy countries and then point to the weaknesses or the problems that they may have to create a justification for overthrowing and regime change in those countries? So what we should focus on is on the global perspective and look at this as a unified international global anti-imperialist movement and deal with the elements of this movement from that perspective. It is the only way that we can overcome the situation that many of the peoples of the world are facing today, and the suffering that is going on and the war that is going on today. So I will stop there and leave the issues, more concrete issues, to the question answer period, which I think is more important at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bayman. Thank you for putting it in the perspective of the fight against imperialism worldwide, because that's where it belongs. So we have a number of questions. Let me do this. Let me read a few of them, and then just ask the panelists if they would like to answer any of those, just to turn on your mic, answer any or all of those. And we'll see how that works out. If it doesn't work well, we'll try something different. And again, I want to apologize for the lack of power in Chile right now, where VJ is, who was supposed to join us, but was unable to do so. So the first question, it says, is a question for Ajamu and or all. Can you comment on the meeting of the U.S. Southcom in Chile this week, where General Laura Richardson was hosted by Salvador Allende's granddaughter and current Defense Minister Maya Fernandez? Venezuela was a key item on the agenda. That's the first question. If you could just hold that in your thoughts or memories while I go on to the next one is, how many different cities and regions did the 5 observers visit? to observe polling. And the third and fourth are actually the same, which are asking why are some of the quote unquote progressive leaders in Venezuela um, seeming to side with the US and saying, asking for a different process to happen in Venezuela now. So let me just ask if you would not be shy and wait for everybody else to do it, but if you will turn your mic on if you would like to answer any of those questions. If not, I can call on
Well,
people.
I'll begin, Joe, in
Okay.
terms of the question that was directed to me regarding Southcom. And I'm really glad that question was raised because it's kind of related to what we are talking about in terms of understanding the regional and global implications of what is unfolding in Venezuela. You see, the enemy, and I use these terms without any hesitation, because I do consider the U.S. to be an enemy state. The enemy is quite serious about maintaining its global hegemony. And one of the ways in which that is happening, of course, is through their military first strategy that's part of their larger commitment to so-called full spectrum dominance. Military first, sanctions second, subversion third, but the objective is to maintain a balance of power that's in their favor. And this is what the left, in particular in the US and Western Europe, needs to understand. The arrogance of this social imperialist left that says, convince me, that what unfolded in Venezuela is legit before I grant you my support. I'm going to stand objectively with the concerns being raised by states like the United States regarding democracy in Venezuela. The absurdity that you can find yourself on the same side of a criminal enterprise called the United States of America with its Western European allies. It's incredible. At what point in history have these entities been ever committed to something called democracy? Are you suggesting that colonial capitalism can be compatible with democracy? Do you not know the history of the colonial capitalist process? It is absurd and actually immoral to find yourself on the same side of this enemy state and this enemy system. So Lord Richardson is quite clear. The commitment to Southcom and the 76 military bases in our region. And let me remind people that despite the privilege of being in North America, you're part of the Americans, that in this region, in our region, they are committed to maintaining hegemony through militarism. So the what is unfolding in Venezuela has enormous impact on all of us in this region and in the world, as Bauman just laid out to folks. Okay, this is serious business. And if you're not serious, if you don't understand the terms of this struggle, then we say, just be quiet, because all you're doing, you are mystifying processes and causing confusion. We're not saying you can't raise questions, but when you keep on finding yourself on the side of imperialism, shouldn't that suggest something to you? Be it Venezuela, Nicaragua, Peru, you name it. If you are supposedly from a left perspective on the same side of a criminal state like the United States of America, well, are you suggesting that U.S. empire is benevolent in some kind of way? So yes, this is something that we've got to deal with, and I'm at the point where I'm not playing with this. We don't need to play with this. for those of us who are on the receiving end of this backward, racist, colonial capitalist system, we don't have the luxury of illusions. Okay, we understand no matter who sits in the white folks' house in D.C., we've got to fight. All of us have to fight. If you understand, and if you're really committed to doing away with this oppression, if you believe in the possibility of transforming this system and transforming this world, you've got to understand you have to fight for it.
Yeah, let me segue from that, because very good presentation of the question, Jamila. It was very good that the issue of Laura Richardson was raised, because the U.S. policy in Latin America is now actually, she is the leading U.S. official who is making policy and implementing policy and meeting with heads of state right now in Latin America. Very interesting that the head of Southcom, four-star general, is replaced the State Department as the leader of U.S. policy. What does that represent? That represents a larger geopolitical issue. It's the geopolitical issue of U.S. declining hegemony and the struggle with China, because China is also a leading actor right now and a new actor in Latin America. And China has gone a different route. There is no military involvement of China in Latin America, even though it is the second largest trading partner for Latin America and the largest trading partner for South America. But China has gone to the way of doing mutually beneficial infrastructure projects with the Belt and Road Initiative. The United States response is a military response. And right now, there are U.S. troops on the ground, boots on the ground, in at least a few of the South American countries: Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Argentina. Colombia is a global partner of NATO. And these are very important things to realize. The shift in U.S. policy to a militarized dominance, not simply an economic dominance, and that reflects the fact that its economic dominance is waning. Now, there's also questions about the role of Colombia and Brazil in their interference in the Venezuelan elections. And I think that we also have to understand in the geopolitical context. The countries that are striving for socialism in Latin America, namely Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, those countries, the United States position is destroy them, regime change. There can be no accommodation. But for social democratic countries like Colombia and Brazil, they use both the stick and the carrot to try to co-opt those countries. And that puts the leaders of those countries in the position of having to sort of triangulate between the hegemon to the north and the socialist countries, or the countries striving for socialism in Venezuela. So that's what we've seen basically. In the terms of Mexico, Mexico has taken a very principled stand. But also, we have to look at the position that AMLO was in. There was just national elections. His party won an overwhelming majority. He's in a pretty stable position. And also, he's in a competition right now, a conflict with the United States over the question of the Mexican judiciary. He wants to open it up to elections, which, by the way, in, I believe, 42 of the 50 U.S. states, the judiciary is either directly elected or some thing like that. But the United States has opposed that, and AMLO is taking a very strong position against the U.S. interference. So he's very sympathetic to the issue of Venezuela. But when we look at Colombia and we look at Brazil, we see two countries where the leadership is a left-center leadership, but they don't have majority support. Their position is much more precarious. And we can only imagine that the U.S. State Department initiative against those countries, which caused them to very unfortunately interfere in the internal affairs of Venezuela. They were under huge pressure. But if we look at their really self-interest, if the Maduro government were to fail, the Bolsonaro government, the Bolsonaros in Brazil, the Uribes in Colombia, they would be greatly emboldened. And so it's not in their self-interest, but we have to just recognize the fact that the United States still is a hegemon and exercises enormous pressure on the region. Now, I'll end there.
Thank you. Zoe or Bayman, do you have any comment on any of that?
No, I think they covered that regional angle pretty well.
Okay. Bayman, did you want to make a comment, or are you okay?
Just briefly, the question of so-called left people opposing Maduro government. What they don't see is the role of external factors in the picture within Venezuela. The pressures that are being brought to the Venezuelan government to deal with the opposition the way they have organized it there in the by the United States is forcing the Venezuelan government to deal with an internal threat as well as an external threat, and as a result, be careful about not creating an all-out front from within against itself. So when it negotiates with some parts of the opposition, it is trying to neutralize it. But some of these so-called left forces call it moving to the right, call him neoliberal, call him compromising or submitting to the right wing. But this is not true. This is not an intended or planned policy of the government. It is being done or carried out under external pressure. And these forces do not understand that a country like Venezuela in kind of few thousand miles, 100 miles south of the United States is vulnerable to this external pressure. And this external pressure is also being translated into an internal pressure the way they're doing it, as our speakers mentioned. And they have to deal with that. So if they make some concessions here and there, it's in defense of the Bolivarian Revolution. It's not a concession to the United States willingly. And they don't understand this necessity that is going on. This is part of reality of all of the states that are resisting the United States right now. And we have to understand that this is a coherent system that we're dealing with and not isolated cases based on preferences of these leaders. That's the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bayman. Yeah, I think it's not same question is asked every single time in every country, whether it's Syria or Libya or Afghanistan or wherever it is. You just got to look. It's the United States that's causing wars all over the world. There's 20 times the number of foreign military bases all other countries in the world. It's the countries that had colonies all over the world and became rich off them that's trying to defend their privilege right now. And they don't change their stripes. They will use whatever they can to make people think one way. But where the U.S. is and where people are opposing imperialism, that's the side we need to be on. A number of questions were related to the left and quote unquote in various areas and what they thought about this and why they don't take a progressive position. And I think that's a question for our movement as a whole in all countries that is something to think about. But there was also a question on Alex Saab. I know Roger has had some history in defending Alex Saab, and some others of us did. The question was, I think, from a PBS thing where they claimed he was selling fraudulent milk or something like this to discredit him. And I wonder if Roger would like to just say who he is and what his story is and what has happened, because I think that is a victory for our movement.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. So I was on the Alex Saab Defense Committee, the North American Defense Committee. There was defense committees all over the world. He was eventually released, and he's free and active in Venezuela. He's a very strong Chavista. And whether the guy was a crook or not. So that's a good question. It's kind of like the question of like, is Mumia Jamal Abdul Jamal innocent? I can't really say whether he is or not, but I sure hope he wasn't. And certainly in terms of Saab, I would say as a member, as an active person in the Defense Committee, I didn't think he was guilty. But let's look at some of the facts. The fact of the matter is that the United States, which charged him with those fraudulent things, have dropped all those charges. And they did that after he was released. So that suggests that the United States does not believe that he was fraudulent and that he did the things that was originally accused. In addition, Colombia had charges against him, and Colombia also dropped all those charges. So right now, there aren't any international actors making those accusations. But I think the more important thing is to understand why Saab was persecuted and why the United States attacked him. He was persecuted because Venezuela is under asphyxiating unilateral coercive measures by the United States. And Alex Saab came to the rescue of the Venezuelan people and helped circumvent those the blockade of Venezuela. He brought food, he brought medicine, he brought fuel to Venezuela. It was very moving when he actually did get he did get released from prison, and he flew to Caracas. And the president's wife, Maduro's wife, Cecilia Flores, greeted him at the airplane, and then he went to the presidential palace, and Maduro greeted him and thanked him. And in the audience behind Maduro was one of the very high-ranking Venezuelan generals, and Maduro said, while we were hit by COVID very, very heavily, and we were suffering tremendously, and the United States prevented us from getting vaccines. But even though we had cash to pay for them, you helped circumvent that. And even though you were imprisoned, Venezuelans had the benefits of the medicine that you brought. And the general that was standing behind him started crying. So he's really a hero to Venezuela. Now, do I know whether he did things that were shady or not? I don't really know. But the important thing was that he came to the rescue of the Venezuelan people. He suffered greatly. He was in jail for 3 years and was tortured during that period. But he never gave in, because unlike most political prisoners like Julian Assange, they were at the mercy of their captors. But Alex Saab had a get out of jail free card. All he had to do was denounce Maduro, and he would have gotten out of jail free. He never did that, and so he's considered a hero in Venezuela, and I consider him a hero as well.
Any other comments on that? Okay, there was a couple of questions and question and answer about the chat. I believe if you look at your chat and you see the 3 dots, you can go there and you can save the chat. That is the case with me. I hope it's the case with the rest of you. If it's not, let me know, and I can add the chat to what you will get 24 hours after the call from Zoom. I'll add a link to the chat, so just let me know about that. Just perhaps a final question is, what is the status now? Has things settled down, or are there still demonstrations going on in Venezuela? Is it generally, have the election results been accepted? What is the U.S. still actively trying to overturn them, what is going on now. And I'd like to just add to that, as a movement, what should we be doing now? I mean, I know that so much of our focus is on Palestine now, and I do believe that everything going on in Gaza and the resistance of the Palestinian people and standing up to this incredible genocide has awakened the world, and that is a blow to imperialism, and that helps all countries that stand up to imperialism, like Venezuela. But should we be doing something, and should we be trying to get together? Should UNAC and the World Peace Council and others, the Latin American Task Force, be working together on a specific campaign for Venezuela? What are your thoughts on that before we close? So what is the status in Venezuela now? And perhaps what should we be doing as next steps to defend Venezuela and fight U.S. imperialism in this particular case? Any thoughts?
Maybe I can start off quickly. I just wanted to add, I saw some comments in the chat regarding kind of like, what is the status, what is happening with the website? And I think a crucial element, which is another thing that the mainstream media has refused to cover, is actually the very extensive and very aggressive cyber attacks that Venezuela has been facing. There's a couple of really good reports that have come out. The Minister of Science and Technology, I think is Gabriela Jimenez, has done a lot of interviews detailing exactly how these attacks were carried out, the impact on them. They've essentially taken offline many of the government websites. And not only that, but actually this was announced by Anonymous on Twitter several times, saying, we're coming for you, Maduro, we're coming for you, we're going to attack these websites. So I think that that's a really crucial element to keep in mind when we're talking about why is the CNE data not available online. There is a truly concrete reason for that, and it has to do with these cyber attacks. I know that our website, People's Dispatch, one time suffered an extremely aggressive DDoS attack, and that was really just from one element. I can only imagine the intensity of these sort of DDoS attacks that could be financed from these spurious actors that we know that are behind the Venezuelan opposition. So I think that has to be kept in mind. I would recommend people check out the report on Misión Verdad on People's Dispatch. We published a translation of it. Follow the social media accounts of the Minister for Science and Technology for actually very concrete and scientific reports on the impact of these cyber attacks. And then regarding, I think, what's been happening in Venezuela since, yesterday was 1 month exactly since the elections took place. And as I sort of mentioned, I mean, in the days following July 28th, there was intense right-wing violence that now, through reports that have come out, it's very clear that these were paid criminal gangs who essentially were told to kind of go and wreak havoc, attack state symbols, attack symbols associated with Chavismo. That's exactly what they did. A lot of those people have been apprehended. And this sort of chaos scenario that we saw in Venezuela following the election has essentially been completely controlled and contained since those days following the elections. There has been calm. I know myself and others were able to participate and cover the massive street mobilizations called for by different sectors of Chavismo. I think the week following the elections, it was like all of the social sectors, every single day was a different sector. One day it was the communes, one day it was women's organizations, one day it was from the CLAP sectors, youth mobilizing every single day to essentially take the streets and say the streets are ours and we are against US meddling in our electoral process. We're defending our sovereignty and we're defending our vote. Yesterday, there was another mass mobilization which Maduro spoke at. And there has been sort of this consistent rallying and showing that actually the streets are with Chavismo. The opposition has tried to call for several international days of action as well as sort of mass mobilizations in Caracas. And these largely have flopped. The International Day of Action, which took place, I think, on August 17th, that was called for by the opposition. Notably, they had several hundred people in Times Square in New York City, as well as Madrid and Miami. And the actual mobilization in Caracas itself was quite small. And in comparison to the Chavista March, which took place in the center of Caracas, where like 10 street blocks were occupied by tens of thousands of people, it was quite clear that the streets continue to be with Chavismo. The streets continue to, and the people demand, defense of their sovereignty. People are very clear that a US-backed project of the opposition is in no way going to favor the well-being of the people. People do want an end to sanctions, and I think that is a really important task that we have here, is to continue to demand an end to these criminal, illegal, and genocidal sanctions. Gaza is one of the areas of land that is subjected to the most criminal and disgusting blockades on earth. But these are measures that are also applied to countries like Cuba and Venezuela, Iran, DPRK. And so I think, to your point, Joe, using the example of Gaza, using the example of Palestine to explain sanctions is actually quite useful, because of course the way that they're applied to Gaza amid a genocide is of another level, but it is useful in showing really how these operate and what is their intended impact, which is to suffocate the people, which is to make transactions impossible, which is to make the delivery of goods impossible. And these sanctions are applied on, a large majority of the world's population unilaterally by the United States. So we have to continue to demand an end to sanctions. We have to continue uniting all of the anti-imperialist organizations in the US that are against sanctions, that believe that, our resources should not be going to strangleholding other countries' economies. So I think our work is really cut out for us, and it's great that there are so many of us that are committed and engaged to actually taking this forward and taking the principled stance that's necessary at this moment.
Thank you, Zoe. Anybody else comment? What the situation is, what we can do?
Joe, it is true that the situation has calmed down, and it appears that the government is in control of the situation. But we should not for a moment think that the struggle is over or that we have passed this stage. There are a lot of under the surface currents and sabotage processes that are going on already. As Zoe mentioned, one of them is this cyber attacks on government. But I'm sure the United States is not going to let go with what happened, and probably they will come up with additional tricks or plots to destabilize the country still. So we have to be alert and really be vigilant about being aware and being mobilized and ready to respond, and also prevent possible future actions. That's what I wanted to emphasize.
Anybody else, last words?
I think we have to be
Go on, John.
as both speakers just indicated, we have to be vigilant in our support for the integrity of the process in that country. Our responsibility is to focus on the activities of the state that we find ourselves in. We can't have any illusions about the character of that state and its intentions. if we can organize ourselves more effectively in building an anti-war and anti-imperialist movement in this country, then we can ensure that we won't have national elections where the issue of war and militarism is not even part of the conversation. So our task is clear. We need to build more effective structures in this country. The people in Venezuela, as the people in Nicaragua and Cuba and other places, have made their mark. They have made a change. They are trying to build new societies. The notion that people in the West, particularly in the US, who have never made an effective revolution, have the ability to arrogantly pontificate on what should be done in these national spaces, again, is unacceptable and needs to be rejected. So let's continue to have these kinds of conversations, raise the issues with boldness and confidence and conviction, and not be concerned about being labeled as tanky or whatever the cute phrase that the social imperialists come up with to justify their collusion with imperialism. These are dangerous times. They're historical times, and one has to make a choice. Either you are standing with progress, standing with the struggling peoples of the world, or you're standing with imperialism, with backwardness, with white supremacy, with exploitation and oppression. It's very stark and very clear.
Just let me add one other comment. I think U.S. imperialism and world imperialism, Western imperialism, is in the worst shape it's been in my lifetime. I think what Zionism is doing with its genocide has exposed them as never before. I think in places like Ukraine, their vulnerability is being shown. And another demonstration you probably didn't hear about, which UNAC was very much involved with, was when NATO came to Washington, D.C. in July. We had a protest, and I'm sure it was not covered, and you didn't hear about it. You hear about protests in Venezuela, but not in Washington, D.C. But what was interesting about that was it was very young and youthful, and many of the Palestinian activists were there. And it is partly our role to try to understand anyway what's going on in Venezuela and around the world and U.S. imperialism, that as we march and as we build these protests against the genocide in Palestine, that we make the connections, that the enemy is the same. They're not doing the right thing in one place and the wrong thing in the other place. They are playing by the same rule book and the same agenda. And as we fight against them, we must fight against them on all fronts. And these are things that we can help bring into the movement to whatever extent we can. So I believe there's new youth rebellion, youth radicalization that we haven't seen since the Vietnam War period. And it is time for us to all be out in the streets and to all be organizing on all of these fronts to come together and build the kind of movement in the belly of the beast that can really help Venezuela, really help the Palestinians, and really help put an end to this world imperialism. So I want to thank all the speakers on behalf of UNAC and the U.S. Peace Council. I want to remind you that you will get in your email, if you've registered, which all of you have, tomorrow, 24 hours after this is completed, something from Zoom, which will have a link to this video. You also can find it on the UNAC website, unacpeace.org, and I'm sure also on the U.S. Peace Council website. So please look for that and please share it among your own lists and your own contacts. So thanks to everybody, and good night.
Master duopoly, no compromise, no retreat.